I arrived just before the snow began to melt, the last breath of winter still clinging to the edges of the Himalayan cliffs. It wasn't a planned trip. I had no itinerary, no map, and no name for the village I was headed to. Only a strange suggestion whispered by an old man in a tea shop in Kathmandu. "If you truly want to see something you'll never forget," he said without looking up from this cup, "go north until you find the path with 3 torn prayer flags. Don't ask questions, don't turn back, and if you hear chanting, pretend you don't." I smiled politely at the time, thinking he was just another storyteller trying to rattle tourists. But I went, not because I believed him, but because I didn't care where I ended up anymore. Something in me had already given up the idea of returning. The climb was cruel. Thin air, cracked lips, frost in my eyelashes. I lost cell signal 3 hours in. The road narrowed to the width of a goat's trail, winding between jagged rock and silence. And then, just like he said, the prayer flags. 3 of them, faded and frayed, fluttering weakly from a wooden pole stabbed into a patch of frozen dirt. Blue, white, red, each marked with ancient mantras I couldn't read, stained with time and ash. I hesitated, and I stepped off the trail. The village didn't appear so much as emerge from the mist. Low stone houses hugged the cliff like fossils. Smoke rose from crooked chimneys into a sky that didn't seem to move. There were no signs, no shops, no laughter. Only eyes. Eyes that peeked out from dark windows, watching, unblinking. No one greeted me. No one smiled. A child saw me and immediately shut the wooden door behind her. Still, I walked deeper in. I found a small inn, or what looked like one. A single lantern swung above the door. When I knocked, an old woman answered. She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask for money. She simply pointed to a room upstairs and handed me a bowl of soup I didn't remember asking for. As I ate, I tried to ask questions. In English, in broken Nepali, she only shook her head, slowly, with a kind of fear I didn't understand. "Why is everyone so quiet?" I asked. She answered, almost a whisper, "Because he might be listening." That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the cold. The fire was still warm in the hearth. It wasn't noise. The entire village was dead silent. It was something else, a pressure, a sense that something was just outside my door, waiting for me to open it. Around midnight, I heard it, low, rhythmic, not footsteps, something softer, like fabric brushing snow, a procession. I went to the window, and there they were. Dozens of figures dressed in dark robes, heads bowed, walking barefoot through the snow. At the center of the group, 6 men carried a wooden coffin on their shoulders. But what struck me was how empty it looked. Light, too light. No sound, no prayers, just movement, silent, coordinated. I watched, breath fogging the glass. They passed through the village, heading toward the edge of the cliff, where a trail disappeared into the trees, the one with the prayer flags. Then, as if sensing me, one of the carriers turned his head. Our eyes met. His face was pale, sunken, and expressionless, but his eyes, they were wide open, bloodshot, and full of something I can only describe as warning. I ducked, heart racing, and yet when I looked again, they were gone. The next morning, the village was alive, but just barely. I stepped outside to find the streets swept clean, no footprints, no sign of last night's funeral. I asked the innkeeper, cautiously, "Was there a ceremony last night?" She froze. Her hands trembled. She dropped the bowl she was carrying. "You looked out the window?" she said. I nodded. She said nothing for a moment, then whispered, "He knows you now." I tried to laugh it off, tried to convince myself it was just a strange dream, maybe even a fever. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same procession, same empty coffin. But this time, I opened the door, only slightly. I stepped outside just enough to hear them, and what I heard still follows me even now. A chant, low, guttural, and slow, like someone chewing on each syllable as if it hurt to speak. But it wasn't in any language I knew. Still, it sounded familiar. The melody curled into my mind like smoke, coiling into places I didn't know existed. I started humming it without realizing, and I couldn't stop. When I went back inside, my lips were bleeding, not from cold, but from the inside, as if the chant had torn me open. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in front of the mirror and watched myself, my reflection, my mouth, still moving, whispering something I didn't understand, but knew by heart.
The morning after my second night in the village, I wandered out of the inn, lips still cracked and red. I didn't speak, I didn't hum, but the chant still echoed inside my skull like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The streets were deserted again. No smoke from the chimneys, no children watching me this time. Just silence so complete it rang louder than noise. I didn't know where I was going. My feet led the way. They took me past the last house in the village, past a frozen field where a scarecrow stood with its arms broken, toward a forest of crooked trees. The path narrowed, winding upward. The air grew colder, thinner. Then I saw it. Perched like a shadow on the side of the cliff, a monastery. Built of black stone, overgrown with lichen and moss. Its walls looked melted by time. There were no statues, no welcome, no signs, and most disturbing of all, no bells. Not even a place where a bell could have hung. Just silence and smoke. Thin trails of incense wound up from the windows, curling unnaturally against the wind. They didn't float, they crawled. The door was open, not wide, but just enough, as if it had been left like that for me. Not an invitation, a warning disguised as one. I stepped inside. The scent hit me first, sandalwood, rotting parchment, and something faintly metallic, like rusted iron or blood. The main hall was dim, lit only by the pale morning light filtering through colored glass. The colors didn't make sense. They changed when I blinked. 1 second, the window glowed green. The next, a sickly purple, then black. Rows of monks sat motionless, backs to me, not chanting, not moving, as if frozen mid-thought. Each wore the same crimson robe with a deep hood covering their face. None of them breathed visibly. I didn't dare speak. I walked slowly toward the center altar where a single candle burned with a blue flame. Behind it hung a large tapestry, frayed and burned in places, but still bearing the image of a boy. A boy with no face. I took a step closer. The image began to change. At first, it looked like brushstrokes shifting under shadow. Then it blinked. A flicker. Then the outline of a mouth formed. A smile, too wide, too hungry. And suddenly I heard it again, that chant. But it wasn't coming from the monks, it was coming from me, from inside me. I covered my mouth, but I could still hear it, echoing in my chest like I was a hollow drum. Someone touched my shoulder. I spun around. A monk had stood up. He was shorter than the others, younger. His hood had fallen back, revealing a pale, gaunt face with eyes too old for the skin they lived in. He didn't speak. He placed a finger to his lips and pointed to the far hallway, a dark corridor that led deeper into the monastery. I followed him. The walls here were covered in scripts, not carved, not painted, but scratched in. Thousands of names, over and over, in dozens of languages, layered on top of one another, some written in blood, some in ash. At the end of the hallway, a single door stood half open. Above it, a wooden sign read, "The Memory Room." Inside was colder than outside. The room was round, with no windows, and lined with hundreds of prayer wheels, the kind you spin to send mantras into the wind. But none of them spun. They were nailed in place, rusted shut, and covered in cloth, as if to keep them quiet. In the center of the room sat a single object, a coffin, wooden, plain, child-sized. I stepped closer. There was no name on it, no markings, only a smear of dried blood across the lid in the shape of a handprint. The young monk stood behind me now. He whispered, finally, "He was never buried." I turned to him, unsure what he meant. He continued, "He died, but they forgot his name. They forgot to cry. They forgot to mourn. So now we remember every day until someone takes his place." I asked the only question I could think to ask. What happens if the remembering stops? His eyes, dark, sunken, ancient, locked with mine. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He only said, "Then he will remember you." And in that moment, I understood why the bells had been removed, why the prayer wheels were sealed, why the chanting never stopped. It wasn't to honor the dead. It was to trap something that should never have been known, something that should have been forgotten. But now, I couldn't forget. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I was listening to myself, murmuring softly the name I was never meant to hear. And in the candlelight, my reflection smiled back at me, not with my face, but his.
They told me never to write it down, never to say it aloud, never to even let it settle too long in my thoughts, because it was not a name anymore. It was a weight, a door, a key to something that wanted to be remembered, not out of love, but out of hunger. But of course, I did what anyone would do. I wrote it. Late that night, I sat at the small desk in the inn, hands trembling, breath fogging in the cold, and I spelled the name phonetically on a piece of yellowed paper. 6 letters, simple, unremarkable. But as soon as I finished the last letter, the candle beside me flickered, then died. Not from a breeze, not from lack of wax. It just stopped burning. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, like the world was holding its breath. I reached for the matchbox, but the match wouldn't strike. Then I heard it, the soft scraping of feet outside my door, slow, deliberate, barefoot on wood. A pause, and then a voice, whispering, not calling to me, but through me, repeating the name I'd just written, over and over, as if it had always been mine. I burned the paper, or tried to. The flame curled the edges, but the ink didn't fade. It turned darker, thicker, as if the name was alive, fighting the fire. I buried it in snow outside. Still, the whispering didn't stop. The next morning, I confronted the young monk. He was sweeping the courtyard outside the monastery with a broom missing half its bristles. He didn't look surprised to see me. I wrote it, I said, his name. He stopped sweeping. You shouldn't have, he said quietly. I didn't say it out loud. You didn't have to. I asked him why the name mattered, why it was dangerous, and he told me the story, or what little of it anyone still knew. Long ago, in a village that no longer appears on any map, a boy was born without a season. No one remembered his birthday. No one recorded the day. He had no festival, no ceremony. No one celebrated his first words or his first steps. He simply was. He was helpful, kind, eager to please, and always quiet. And because he asked for nothing, no one gave. When he died, alone, in the corner of the monastery's stone granary, no one noticed for 3 days. By then, no one could remember his name. So, no one wrote it on his grave, because there was no grave. They burned his body with the evening trash, and the next day, the snow fell, as if it never happened. But the mountain remembered, the wind remembered, and most of all, he remembered. What it felt like to be erased, what it felt like to be forgotten by everyone you ever tried to love. So he made a vow, if I cannot live in memory, I will live in ritual. The next morning, one of the monks woke up chanting a name he didn't recognize. The others joined in. They prepared a coffin with no body. They carried it down the mountain trail just as they do now, and they've done it every single day since. Because if they stop, he will stop waiting and start becoming. But what is he now? A spirit? A ghost? The monk shook his head. He is not dead. Not anymore. I didn't understand. Not until I returned to my room and found the mirror cracked, only slightly, like something had tapped on the other side. And in the corner, where frost had formed, 6 letters were written in perfect clarity, even though I had scrubbed the name from my memory. Except I hadn't. It was still there. It was rooted now, like a splinter in my mind. A rot, and that night I said it, aloud, once.
and I smiled as I bled from the gums. The name cannot be translated. It means nothing. It is not even a sound that fits the human mouth comfortably. But once you've heard it, once you've spoken it, it lives inside you. And then it's not just his name anymore. It's yours.
The coffin was always empty. That's what they told me. That's what I told myself. But by the fourth night, I stopped believing that. The procession came again, just after midnight. I no longer needed to open the door to hear it. I could feel the footsteps through the wooden floor. Not loud, not heavy, but deliberate, like a heartbeat echoing beneath the earth. I went outside this time. The village was frozen in place, not with ice, but with a kind of stillness that felt chosen. No wind, no sound. Even the prayer flags on the cliff didn't move. The monks walked by, silent as ever, 6 of them, carrying the coffin on their shoulders like it weighed nothing. But that was the lie, because this time I saw one of them struggling. Just for a moment, his knees buckled slightly. The man next to him hissed something, and they steadied again. The coffin was not light anymore. It was growing heavier. I followed. They didn't stop me. Down the winding path toward the cliff's edge, where the forest grew too thick for sunlight. It was colder there, not in a natural way, not a winter chill, but the cold that comes from something pulling the warmth out of you. The trail ended at a stone platform, ancient, cracked, but meticulously clean. At the center was a circular carving of symbols I didn't recognize. Around it, 6 statues of monks, each with mouths sealed shut by rusted wire. The monks lowered the coffin onto the center of the circle. They didn't pray, they didn't speak. They simply stood there and listened to nothing, to silence, to something that wasn't there but wanted to be. Then they turned and left, leaving the coffin behind. I waited until they disappeared into the trees, and I approached. The wood was old, weather-worn, but the nails in the lid looked fresh, too fresh. I placed my hand on the surface. It was warm, not from the sun. It was pitch dark now, but from within. I knelt beside it and pressed my ear to the lid. At first, nothing. Then, breathing, shallow, uneven, as if lungs that had forgotten how to work were trying to remember. And beneath the breathing, a whisper, a single word, my name. I recoiled, stumbled backward, fell onto the stone. My hands landed in the carved circle, and it burned. Not fire, but memory. Images rushed into my mind, a boy's face stitched together from thousands of other faces, none of them complete. Eyes that blinked sideways, a mouth that whispered in prayers and laughter and screaming all at once. I couldn't move. The trees around me began to creak, even though there was no wind. And the coffin? It shifted, just slightly, but enough to hear one of the nails pop. The silence was breaking, and something underneath was stirring, not in anger, but in recognition, like it had been waiting for someone who knew the name, waiting for someone who had said it out loud, waiting for me. I ran. Up the hill, through the trees. I don't remember the path. I only remember the sound of the coffin lid creaking open behind me, not all the way, but just enough to let the cold reach out and follow. Back at the inn, the old woman was gone. The fire was out, and the mirror in my room was covered in handprints from the inside. I collapsed into bed, not from exhaustion, but from weight, a heaviness pressing down on my chest. I could barely breathe. And then I felt it. Someone was standing at the end of the bed. I didn't hear them come in. I didn't see them, but I knew, because they were smiling, and silence never sounded so loud. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I dreamed of carrying the coffin, of chanting a name I no longer believed belonged to anyone else. And when I woke up, my hands were covered in splinters from wood I hadn't touched. The coffin is no longer empty. It never was. It just needed someone to remember long enough, to listen hard enough, to whisper back. And now that someone is me.
By the 5th day, I was no longer the only outsider in the village. A group of 3 hikers, 2 men and a woman, arrived just before sunset. Their boots were muddy, their jackets expensive. The kind of people who take selfies on mountaintops and chase places too sacred to be seen. They were loud, too loud for this place. I heard them joking in the inn's dining room, laughing about how weird the villagers were, how no one would talk to them. I wanted to warn them, but I didn't, because I wasn't sure what was real anymore, because part of me already knew they were not going to leave. That night, the procession came, as always, but something was different. I stood by my window, now covered in frost even from the inside, and counted the monks. 7. There were always 6, but tonight there were 7, and the 7th monk, shorter than the rest, stumbling slightly as he walked, wore a bright red hiking jacket, one of the new arrivals. I rushed outside, breath fogging the air, heart beating faster than it should in the thin mountain oxygen. I followed them again, down the same trail, to the same circle of stone. This time I kept to the trees, hidden, watching. The coffin was lowered, like before, but instead of leaving, the monks formed a circle and began to chant, low, slow, the same syllables I'd whispered in my sleep, the same rhythm that had been drilling itself into my skull for days. Except this time, I understood it. Not the words, but the meaning. They were not mourning, they were sealing. And the 7th monk? He was smiling, not with his mouth. His was slack, trembling, not in control. But his eyes, they shimmered with that same recognition I'd seen in the mirror. The next morning, only 2 hikers came down for breakfast. They didn't notice their friend was missing. Or maybe they did, and just couldn't remember. I asked where the 3rd one was. The woman blinked, tilted her head. 3rd? She said. There were only 2 of us. I didn't believe her. I thought she was lying. But when I checked the guest logbook, there were only 2 names. The red jacket man's name was gone. Scratched out? No. Like it had never been there. Like he had never existed. Later that day, I found his backpack behind the monastery, neatly placed, untouched. Inside,
His passport, his phone, a notebook filled with scribbles of strange words. At the very back page, a list, handwritten, shaky. Names I must not forget. And below that, only one name remained unblurred. The same one I had once written on yellow paper. The same one I had burned. I took the notebook to the young monk. He flicked through it slowly, expression unreadable. Then he looked at me and asked, "Do you remember what he looked like?" I nodded. Of course I did. His hair, his jacket, his face. The monk smiled sadly. "Then he is already inside you." I didn't understand, not fully, until I passed a mirror on the way out, and for a split second I saw him, not behind me, not beside me, but in my face. A glitch, a flicker. His smile stretched across my mouth, his eyes blinking through mine. That night, the woman vanished. Her partner woke up screaming, unsure why he was alone. He searched the village in tears. He begged the monks. He begged me. But by morning, he too was gone. The procession that night had 9 monks. 2 of them limped. One wore earrings. Another wore a scarf I recognized. None of the villagers said a word. The innkeeper closed early. The windows were shuttered tight. Only I stood outside, watching the empty coffin, knowing it was no longer empty, knowing it would never be empty again, because it wasn't a coffin, it was a door, and names were the keys, and once you open it, even just a crack, it remembers you, every part, even the parts you try to forget. I left the village on the 7th day. At least, I thought I did. The road was open, the trail clear. The sun even broke through the mist as I descended the mountain. It felt wrong somehow. Too easy. No one stopped me. No monks, no villagers, not even the wind. It was like I'd been allowed to leave, not because I was safe, but because I had already taken it with me. By the time I reached the next town, a tourist hub with Wi-Fi and electricity and overpriced hostels, I was convinced I had imagined it all. The monks, the coffin, the name. Just altitude sickness. Hypothermia, maybe. That's what I told myself. Until the dreams started. They weren't dreams in the normal sense. Not narrative, not symbolic. Just sound. Each night I'd fall into darkness and hear the chant. Not outside me. Inside. In my lungs. My ribs. My teeth. I woke up one night with blood on my pillow. I'd been whispering in my sleep so long my gums had cracked open. The front desk clerk asked if I had a cold. I said yes, but I knew the truth. I wasn't sick. I was becoming a vessel. I took a flight back to my country, sat through 12 hours of recycled cabin air and in-flight meals and strained smiles from strangers. I thought I was leaving the mountain behind, but somewhere over the ocean, I glanced at the seat beside me, the one that had been empty since boarding. Someone was sitting there. A boy. Maybe 11. Maybe older. His age was hard to pin down. He smiled at me. His lips didn't move, but in my head I heard it. "You brought me home." I didn't sleep for the rest of the flight. When we landed, no one else seemed to have seen him. He was gone. Of course he was. But his voice stayed.
I returned to my apartment, locked the door, closed the blinds, turned on every light. It didn't help, because the chanting never came from outside. It came from the corners of my own mind. Sometimes it was faint, like a hum behind a wall. Other times it was deafening. It echoed in my breath. It leaked into my thoughts. I began to forget words in my native language and instead remember sounds I had no business knowing, syllables that didn't belong to this world. I tried to record myself sleeping. The first night, there was nothing. The second night, I mumbled for 45 minutes. The third night, I screamed. Not in pain, not in fear, in worship. Like something inside me had fully taken over, and all I could do was praise it in tongues not yet spoken by the living. I sent the audio to a friend of mine, a linguist. He specialized in Himalayan dialects, had studied rare chants and oral traditions from monasteries lost to time. He listened, then called me, and the first thing he said was, "Where did you get this?" I told him. He didn't laugh. He didn't say I was crazy. He just went quiet. Then, "You need to come in, now, before you forget who you are." I met him the next morning. He looked like he hadn't slept either. He had translated part of the chant, not all. Some of the sounds didn't exist in written language, but the parts he could decode made one thing painfully clear. It's not a prayer. It's a map. I didn't understand. He pulled out diagrams, notes, ancient scripts, showed me correlations between the chant's rhythm and ritual burial patterns. The words weren't meant for gods. They were meant to anchor something. Something that feeds on memory. Every syllable is a hook. Every repetition is a chain. And once you know it, you are never just chanting it. You're keeping it alive. I asked him what would happen if I stopped, if I blocked it out, if I resisted. He looked at me with that same hollow gaze the young monk once had. You can't. That's the trick. It's not your voice anymore. I tried anyway. I wore earplugs, blasted music, used sleeping pills, meditated. Nothing helped. The chant lived below sound. It filled in every silence like water flooding a dry riverbed. I began to write it without meaning to, on napkins, receipts, mirrors. I once woke up in the bathtub, every tile around me scribbled in the script of the forgotten. And then one night, I saw him again, the boy, standing at the foot of my bed. Same smile, same eyes, but this time, he whispered my name. And when he did, I forgot my mother's face. Just like that. Gone, erased, replaced with his. That was the price. Not death, not possession, but replacement. The chant doesn't kill you. It doesn't possess you. It simply rewrites you, one memory at a time, until one day, there's nothing left of you to remember. And all that remains is the chant.
By the time the chanting settled into every corner of my silence, mirrors stopped showing me. Not entirely. They still displayed something, but not me. Not anymore. It started small. My reflection began blinking a beat slower than I did, delayed by half a second, maybe less, just enough to notice. At first, I blamed exhaustion. Sleep deprivation can fracture perception. But one night, I waved at the mirror, and it didn't wave back. I stood frozen. The figure in the glass just stared at me. Same face, same body, same blood on the lip from another night of unconscious whispering. But no response, no motion. Just that wide-eyed look of recognition. As if it finally knew something I didn't. I covered every mirror in the apartment, taped paper over them, turned them to the wall. But it didn't matter. Reflections found other ways, in windows, in phone screens, even in puddles on the sidewalk. And every time, it was the same. A version of me that had stopped pretending to be me. Once, I caught it smiling when I wasn't. Another time, I watched it mouth words I wasn't saying. But the worst was the night I saw it turn and walk away, while I remained frozen, breath held. It vanished into the edge of the mirror, and I was left staring at an empty room. I told my friend, the linguist. He said ancient Himalayan lore speaks of false selves, echoes created when a name gains too much weight in the spiritual world. You've made space for him, he said. Now he's using your reflection to stretch. Stretch into where? Here. Everywhere. I stopped trusting reflections. I stopped trusting myself because I couldn't be sure what part of me was still original and what part had been written over by the chant. Was this my hand or the boy's? Were these my memories? I tried recalling my father's voice. Nothing. Tried remembering my first kiss. Gone. All I could remember now was the name. Not mine. His. Then the scratching began from inside the mirrors. At first, faint, like fingernails on glass. Then louder, more desperate. At night, the sounds came from every reflective surface at once. Not just scratching, knocking, like he wanted to come back in, like he regretted leaving. Or worse, like he never left. I recorded it once, set up a camera in front of the bathroom mirror, left the room, came back an hour later, played the footage. At exactly 37 minutes in, the mirror fogged on its own, as if someone breathed onto it. Then a handprint, small, childlike. Then words appeared, slowly traced from the other side of the glass. You are forgetting wrong. I don't know what that means. Not fully. But I think I'm not just losing myself. I'm misplacing the wrong parts. The parts he needs to take full control. The chant doesn't just hollow you, it reshapes you into something he can wear. And mirrors? They're rehearsal spaces, the place where he learns to move like you. I dreamed I was inside the mirror once. Not metaphorically. I was on the other side, watching my real body sleep. And when I tried to scream, to bang on the glass, my voice came out as the chant. Low, constant, unstoppable. When I woke, my hands were wet. The mirror beside the bed was shattered, and my fingers were sliced open. But the cracks, they didn't spider outward from the center. They spidered inward, as if something had tried to pull me through. I left my apartment after that, checked into a hotel, top floor, no mirrors, no TVs, paid in cash. I stayed there for days. No chanting, no reflections, just silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, safe. But then, on the fourth night, I turned on my phone to check the time. The black screen lit up, and there he was, smiling. In the reflection, standing behind me. I threw the phone, shattered it. Didn't matter, because it wasn't the screen. It was me. I had become the mirror.
There are others. I used to think I was the only one, the only idiot who followed the wrong path, whispered the wrong name, stared too long into silence. But the truth is, there are many of us, and most of them have forgotten they were ever anyone else. I started finding them, not deliberately, not through forums or cults or secret chat rooms, just glimpses at airports, in cafes, on trains. People who hummed the same rhythm under their breath without realizing. People whose eyes didn't quite blink in sync. People who stared at their own reflections with distrust. Once, on a subway platform, I heard it, the chant, faint, beneath the sound of wheels and screeching steel. I turned and saw a woman, maybe in her 40s, sitting alone, eyes closed, whispering syllables that didn't belong in any language. I sat beside her, didn't say a word. After a long minute, she opened her eyes, looked straight at me, and mouthed, "You brought him too, didn't you?" We didn't need to explain. She had seen the monastery too. She had tried to forget the name. She had left before the funeral reached her, but not before the coffin looked at her. She told me the chant had changed her memory, rewritten her past in quiet, cruel increments. "My daughter," she whispered, "she still lives with me, but now she calls me Auntie. She doesn't remember being born. My husband," she said, "sleeps in another room. He says he met me 5 years ago, but we've been married for 15. And worst of all, sometimes I see photos on my walls and I'm not in them." Another man I met, a former teacher, couldn't remember how to write his own last name. He showed me his journal, pages filled with loops and marks and symbols that looked like script but weren't. He said he thought he was preserving himself, but now he didn't know which part was still his. I asked them both the same question. Why are we still here? Why hadn't we vanished like the others? Why were we remembering too long? The teacher answered first. Because he needs witnesses. The boy doesn't just want to be remembered, he wants to be believed. He wants stories told. He wants his name to echo through people who once swore to forget it. And the longer we remember, the longer he stays awake. The woman spoke next. He doesn't want worship. He doesn't want fear. He wants repetition. He wants to be true through us. I asked if we could stop it, burn it out, erase the chant, block the name. The teacher laughed, a sad, dry thing. Can you forget your own heartbeat? Because that's where it lives now. Not in your mouth, not in your memory, in your rhythm. Every breath you take says him. That night, I dreamed of the others. A room with no doors, walls covered in mirrors, all cracked. Each pane held a version of someone I'd seen before. Some screamed, some wept, some smiled, but none of them looked alive. And in the center of the room, the boy sat cross-legged, chanting, but not to himself, to us, teaching, rehearsing, sharpening the syllables that would soon leave our mouths when we opened them next. I woke with someone else's name carved in my palm. It wasn't his. It was mine.
but the letters were wrong, as if he'd taken it apart and tried putting it back together using different tools. Now I keep a list. Names of people I meet who might know. I don't speak to them anymore. Just observe. Watch how their lips twitch in silence. How their reflections arrive a second late. How they tilt their heads slightly when a prayer bell rings in a temple far too far from the Himalayas. I wonder if they know, if they realize, or if they too are simply remembering too long. There's a final stage, I think, a moment when memory becomes identity, when the chant stops feeling foreign and starts sounding familiar, when you stop resisting and start participating, not by choice, but by echo. I'm close. I can feel it. The boy stands behind every silence now, waits at the edge of my words, smiles through my eyes. And every time I forget who I was, he remembers for me.
I thought I could end it. I truly did. That was my last illusion. That after everything, the name, the chant, the boy, I could go back, find the monastery again, and somehow reverse it. Undo what had already carved itself into my soul. So I returned, packed light, no phone, no mirror, no name on my passport. Just a whisper in my chest, guiding me like a second heartbeat. The trail was longer than before. Or maybe I had changed, grown heavier with echoes, slowed by the weight of 1,000 remembered silences. But eventually, I saw the prayer flags, still torn, still colorless, still waiting. The village welcomed me the same way it had the first time, by pretending I didn't exist. No one spoke, no one looked up, but one by one the doors closed, slowly, gently, like blinking eyes that had seen enough. At dusk, I returned to the monastery. The bells were still missing. The incense still curled backward, flowing into the stone. The monks were where I left them, unmoving, unchanged, unforgiven. And in the center, the tapestry, still frayed, but now the boy's face was complete. He was smiling. The young monk was waiting for me, though he no longer looked young. His eyes were darker, his spine bent, his lips cracked from whispering. "You came back," he said. I nodded. "I want to finish it." He didn't ask what it meant. He understood. He led me wordlessly down the same dark hallway, the one lined with scratched-in names. Only now the walls pulsed, like breath, like memory. The memory room was colder than I remembered. The coffin was still stood at the center, but it was no longer nailed shut. Its lid was open. Inside, nothing. And yet, I could feel it. Not emptiness, not presence, but expectation. Waiting, welcoming. "What do I do?" I asked. The monk handed me something small, a strip of cloth, stiff with blood and ash, a prayer sash. On it, the boy's name, inked in a language that had no vowels, no stops, only syllables that looped endlessly, a chant in physical form. "Tie it around your tongue," he whispered. "If you can speak his name while bound, you will take his place, and he will be free." I should have run, but it was too late for should, too late for anything but closure. I stepped into the circle,
stood over the coffin, tied the sash in my mouth, and whispered. The world split, not with noise, but with memory. The floor fell away. The walls screamed, not in sound, but in moments. My childhood broke open in reverse, my mother's face unlearned, my name unsaid, my first breath rewound into silence. And in the silence, he stepped out, the boy. Not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as me, wearing my face like a well-tailored mask. He smiled, not cruelly, not warmly, just inevitably, and he whispered, "Thank you." I fell into the coffin, hard, but it didn't hurt, because I was no longer a body, just a shape, just a thought pressed thin between the pages of a ritual. The lid closed, darkness came, and for the first time, there was peace. No chant, no echo, only nothing. For 1 second. Then, I opened my eyes. Not in the monastery, not in the coffin, but in my apartment, back home. Exactly as I left it. The mirror was whole. The lights were on. My phone buzzed with unread messages. The world, real, familiar, boring, wrapped around me like a lie I was too tired to question. I laughed. Maybe it had all been a dream, a breakdown, a psychotic episode. Maybe I had never left. Maybe there was no village, no monks, no name. Maybe I was safe now. Until I looked at the mirror. He was there. Not in the mirror, as the mirror. Smiling with my face, breathing with my lungs, living my life. And me? Still whispering, still remembering, still chanting from inside the coffin, because there was no final day, only the illusion of escape. I don't know how many days it's been. Time folds here. There's no morning, no night, only the sound of footsteps above, soft, ritual, eternal. The coffin doesn't creak. The air doesn't move. I'm not cold. I'm not warm. I'm not me. I'm the idea of someone who once tried to forget a name that refuses to be forgotten. Sometimes I see light, not outside, inside. Memories, not mine, flickering like film on stone. A child holding a candle, a monastery with no bell, a face reflected in glass that doesn't belong to you, over and over, a loop stitched from stolen memory, a story that cannot stop being told. Because that's the secret. The curse is not death. The curse is not the chant. The curse is story. He doesn't want rest. He doesn't want release. He wants remembering every day, forever. And here's what's worse. Now that I've been emptied, there's room. Room for new names, new faces, new footsteps to carry the coffin. Room for you, because if you've heard his name, even once, he lives in you. If you've dreamed of him, if you've repeated the chant, even silently without meaning to, if you've ever looked into a mirror and felt watched, not by something behind you, but by something inside you, then he has already begun to write his name over yours. It starts small, a syllable you can't forget, a hum that haunts your breath, a memory you lose like a dropped coin and never find again. Then a dream, then a smile that isn't yours, then the urge to walk uphill toward mist, toward prayer flags, toward home. That's why the funeral must never stop. It's not to honor the boy, it's to contain him, to trick him into thinking he's still being remembered, to keep him bound to the path, to the casket, to the chant, to them, to us. But the world forgets fast now. Rituals fade, monasteries fall, names erode. And when the monks are gone, when the procession is broken, when no one carries the empty coffin down the hill anymore, he will not cry, he will not sleep, he will wake. And then, he will remember all of us. So tell the story, not because you believe, but because he does. Whisper the chant, not for prayer, but for delay. Speak his name, not to summon him, but to satisfy him. Just long enough, just one more day, just one more funeral. Because the moment everyone forgets, he will be remembered best. And when that happens, you'll hear a knock from your mirror, from your mouth, from inside the coffin that's been waiting for you all along.
They walk among us. They look like us. They talk like us. But they are not entirely here. They carry pieces, not of him, not of his corpse, but of his memory. And memory is heavier than bone. I see them now, everywhere. At airports, humming at the gate with no music playing. At temples, spinning prayer wheels too slowly, whispering into the wind. At libraries, running fingers over book spines like they're searching for something they once knew. And in mirrors, when they think no one is watching, they mouth his name. I don't know how many there are. Dozens? Hundreds? But I know this. He is dividing. Not into copies, not into clones, but into hosts. Each one carries a fraction, a syllable, a memory, a habit, and together, unknowingly, they preserve him. They are his walking monastery now, his funeral stretched across cities, across continents. There is a man in Tokyo who writes the same phrase on a napkin every morning and burns it without looking. There is a woman in Paris who leaves her window open at midnight and places a child-sized glass of water on her sill. There is a teenager in New Delhi who dreams in languages she's never spoken and wakes with her pillow wet from whispering. None of them remember when it started. None of them know they are mourning. They only know they must, because if they stop, he feels it, and he comes to collect what's his. I once met a girl in a rural train station in Mongolia. She couldn't have been older than 12. She wore a red string around her wrist and muttered beneath her breath while staring at the mountains. I sat beside her. She looked at me, eyes clouded with too much knowing. "Do you know him?" she asked. I didn't answer. She nodded anyway. "You're leaking," she said. "He's almost done with you." I asked her who taught her the chant. She said no one did. She was born remembering it. It's in the air now, in frequency, in silence, in the moments between thoughts, that pause when you forget what you are about to say, when you step into a room and don't know why. He's there, planting reminders, leaving pieces of himself in your forgetfulness. Because if you forget everything else, but remember him, that's enough. That's all he ever needed. Not love,
not forgiveness, not peace. Just space in your thoughts, a corner in your mind no one else uses, a hallway of quiet with a door at the end, a coffin with your name already carved into the lid. And those who carry him now, they never speak to each other, they never gather, they never form a cult, because cults can be burned, but a whisper spreads, soft, invisible, unstoppable. So if one day you feel something watching you from inside your own memory, if a stranger says a word you know but can't explain, if a child hums a melody that makes you weep without reason, if your reflection doesn't blink when you do, you'll know you've met one of them. Or worse, you already are. And when the next funeral comes, and it will, and the monks lower a coffin that feels a little heavier than the day before, listen carefully. They're not chanting for the boy anymore. They're chanting for you.
There was a time when the casket only opened in dreams. Now it creaks in waking life. It began with a rumor, whispered through mountain wind. A procession had failed. Some said the sixth monk tripped. Some said one forgot the chant mid-step. Others said the coffin simply moved by itself. But the truth is simpler. The boy got tired of waiting. Every morning the ritual continued, as it had for centuries. The same path, the same chants, the same empty box. But now it was heavier and louder. And once, just once, a villager saw it breathe. She was sweeping her steps when the monks passed. She heard a sigh from inside the coffin. Not a groan, not a moan. A child's sigh, like someone waking from a nap. That night, the village dogs howled until dawn. The prayer flags twisted themselves into knots, and the mirror in the monastery hallway cracked down the center. Not shattered, split, like a mouth opening. And inside that split, they saw eyes. The monks said nothing. They carried the coffin again the next morning. But now, one monk's hands bled from the wood, not from splinters, but bite marks. They wrapped his palms and burned his robe, said it was a test, said the boy was restless. But inside, they knew he was ready, not to be freed, but to emerge. The casket, once nailed shut, had begun to open itself. At first a sliver, then wider. They nailed it again. He unnailed it. They chained it. He unraveled the metal like thread. They placed stones on top. He made them float. And now it opens from the inside. No one knows what's inside anymore. Not fully. It's no longer a child, no longer a ghost, not even a spirit. It's a shape, a presence built from every ritual, every chant, every memory he has eaten. And when the lid opens, it releases nothing, but everything changes. One villager aged 50 years in a blink, just for looking. Another began to speak in backward syllables, in his voice. A baby born during the procession came out smiling too wide and hasn't stopped whispering since. They say the boy is not climbing out of the coffin. He is reaching through it, one finger at a time, pressing against the barrier between what was meant to be sealed and what was never meant to be known. And when the coffin opens fully, he won't need to walk. We'll already be chanting for him, opening doors for him, letting him live through our stories, through this story. Because even now, even as you read this,
You're carrying part of the lid. You're remembering a name you never asked to know. You're imagining the box, and somewhere, a nail loosens, a hinge creaks, and the boy smiles a little wider. The monks say there's only one solution, a final ritual, one that's never been performed, because it requires something they've never had, a volunteer, someone willing to climb into the casket before it opens, someone who can hold him from the inside, someone who forgets their name completely and remembers only his. I am that volunteer. Or maybe I already was. Maybe this story is my goodbye. Maybe the moment you finish reading this, I will no longer be the one telling it. Maybe he will.
You can always tell who they are by the way they speak when they wake. The voice isn't theirs, not fully. The pitch is off, the timing strange, the vowels stretched too long, like they're remembering how to be human. It always starts in dreams. That's the crack in the door. Sleep, where memory floats loose, where names blur, where voices echo without bodies. That's where he practices, where he rehearses, where he speaks not with sound, but with shape. And once he finds the right rhythm, he speaks through you. I've met dozens of them now, people who carry him in their sleep. Some don't know. Some wake with bruises on their tongue from whispering too hard. Some wake humming melodies that never existed before. Some wake weeping, because for a few seconds they remember being him. Not just seeing him, not just hearing him. They are him, inside the casket, weightless but aware, floating inside a ritual, a memory made of incense, stone, and bone. One man I met in Istanbul hadn't slept in 6 months. He'd sewn the corners of his mouth shut, crudely, with fishing wire. He held a sign that said, "If I open my mouth in dreams, he comes closer." A woman in Bangkok taped her own voice every night, not to catch herself talking, but to catch someone else. A different voice, childlike, patient, whispering in a tongue that doesn't exist, but feels older than any prayer. Another woman, a former opera singer, had forgotten how to speak entirely. Not from trauma, not from injury, but because every time she opened her mouth, a different melody came out. Soft, beautiful, terrifying, because it wasn't hers. All of them were changing, not possessed, not cursed, but rewritten, their identities unspooling thread by thread, stitched with something foreign, a new language made of grief and silence and need. And the voice? It always said the same thing, in different words, different tones, but always the same meaning. I was forgotten. You will not forget. That's how he lives now. Not through mirrors, not through shadows, but through us, through voice, through retelling. He's a parasite of story, a ghost that haunts syntax. Every time you say his name, even in thought, he plants a seed. And when you sleep, he waters it. You wake up tired. You forget details. You speak slower. You hum things you've never heard. And soon, he speaks through you. And when enough people dream in his voice, even for a second, he becomes real. That's the new ritual. No longer monks and coffins and mountains. Now it's podcasts, stories, posts, whispers behind your own lips.
The monastery is everywhere. And the casket? It's your throat. So if you've ever dreamed of chanting, if you've ever whispered someone else's name without meaning to, if your voice has ever trembled in the morning for no reason at all, then you're already part of the procession. You've already carried him. And when the final chant is spoken, when the last sleeper opens their eyes and forgets their own name, he will speak for them, for all of us. They still carry the coffin, every morning, even now, somewhere, high in a place where no maps reach, where flags don't wave, and where silence breathes louder than song. The monks still walk the winding path, barefoot, bleeding, bound to a vow older than memory. They chant, not for peace, not for forgiveness, but for containment. The coffin, you remember, was once empty. Now it is not. Now it breathes. Sometimes it trembles, sometimes it weeps, and sometimes it laughs, softly like a child remembering something too dark for the world outside. There are days the coffin opens itself before they reach the altar. There are days it leaks names, drips memories from between the cracks, old dreams never lived, faces forgotten before they were ever known. And the monks must catch them, quickly, before they slip into the dirt and grow into stories again. Because that's what he is now. Not a boy, not a ghost, not a name. A story. A ritual that sustains itself. A loop that feeds on fear, remembrance, and the desperate need to explain what should never be spoken. The monks do not age anymore. They have become the rhythm, their lives dissolved into the chant, each breath a syllable, each step a page. They are the book now, and he is the author. But the monks are not enough. They never were. That's why you know his name. That's why you heard his chant in the silence between chapters. That's why you kept reading, even after your hands trembled, even after your mouth whispered without your permission. This story is the new funeral. You are carrying the coffin now, not on your shoulder, but in your memory, in the way you think of him even when you try not to, in the way you look at mirrors twice, in the way silence suddenly feels crowded. He doesn't want to be buried. He doesn't want to be freed. He wants to be remembered forever, every day, every breath, every whisper. That's why you can't forget, because forgetting would be kindness, and this story is not kind. This story is a promise. A new monk will be chosen. A new coffin will be carved, but it won't be made of wood. It will be made of you, of pages, of pixels, of echoes in digital wind, of a voice that keeps speaking long after the lips have closed, of a name you don't remember learning but can't stop repeating. He is awake now. He walks without footsteps. He smiles through your voice. He watches from the cracks in your reflection. And when the chant returns tonight, soft, familiar, low, don't fight it. Just breathe and follow. Because the boy is waiting, and the road is winding, and the casket is open, and the funeral never ends.